So, how many of you can relate to this? If you've seen the Front Range of Colorado, coming up through Wyoming and into Montana, especially the Billings area, it's not easy being a tree. And as a matter of fact, sometimes you wonder how any of them survive. So, does anybody deal with this stuff very often? Yeah, right. You have high winds here? Sustained? What's the sustained high wind normal around here? 70, 80?
7 mile an hour,
Yeah. So I was saying, and which direction does it come from?
west, southwest.
Okay. So for us, it comes out of the north, northwest usually, rarely out of the west. So in Fort Collins, we get gigantic hail. I think you get this here too, right? Especially out on the prairie. And then you get winter kill. So sometimes you think that Siberian elms are indestructible, but if a freeze comes early, this is what happens. And all these things, can really have an impact on what we call our urban forestry. And then you have, if that's not enough, still Mother Nature. Has anybody ever seen a tree get hit? You have, right? A few times, maybe. This was one of my first ones when I started out. This was a green ash that absolutely blew apart. And this is at Colorado State University campus. This building here faced the tree. Every single window was shattered from that explosion. And the only thing that saved the people that were in those offices was, some of you youngsters won't remember this, but the computer monitors were about this big and about this thick back then. And it stopped the shrapnel from the tree. So, war stories as you go along. You just pick up things on the way. And then this is everything that happens during a snowstorm, right? It just takes all of your attention. Well, in some ways, emerald ash borer is sort of like a big, slow-moving snowstorm. It's just a slow-moving disaster coming through. And you kind of need to set your mind to manage that. But it is manageable. And as Dr. McCullough talked about and what Kathleen will talk about, it really is a manageable pest, even though you're going to have some losses and you're going to have to deal with that. So my goal today is to kind of break down barriers between private and government, start talking about working together, giving the same message so that the whole industry gains a great and credible foothold in whatever community that you're working in. So if you and your competitor are saying the same things as what the city forester is, that's a good thing for the industry, and it's a good thing for the forest. So sometimes we kind of have to put ourselves aside and look at the greater good for whatever community or state we're in. Okay, this is all drought. I think it gets up over 100 here in Billings, right, in the summers. You can go long periods of time without water. In the early 2000s in the Front Range of Colorado, we had some pretty severe drought. And these are all symptoms, including death and dieback. And then flooding. Doggone it, like Boulder didn't get a break hardly. They had this flooding and then found emerald ash borer, or was it the other way around? It was the flooding first. Yeah, flooding and then emerald ash borer in Boulder. So these are all things that, damage our tree and our environment. But it's nature, things that we can't really control very well. All right, has anybody been here before? This is Fort Collins from the air. Yeah, so a lot of you have been there. And then this is Boulder, and there's the Flatiron Mountains right there. And you can see we have a lot of coverage in our urban forest setting. So now, just to kind of get you all limbered up, I'm going to give you a quiz. How many of you came here to take a test today? All right, nice. Let's see. If you were to see this, popcorn on the side of a pine tree, some sapsucker feeding, what would you diagnose that as? Like that? All right, who said that? Get yourself a coffee. Nice. All right, so now we're going to boost that up just a little bit here. Go to a deciduous tree. This is an oak tree. The top is fading and dying back. Any ideas on that? Raise your hand. Chlorosis, yeah, that's a symptom. That's not the underlying cause. Anybody else? All right. Does that look a little bit like emerald ash borer? Yeah, and so what that is the Gamble oak borer, and it loves English oak. Do you plant English oak here at all? Okay. Is it a good tree here? Good.
The new national champion, English oak, is in Billings. I nominated it just a few months ago.
The national champion?
Yeah.
Let's see each other at the break. I'd like to get the address.
That's a magnificent tree.
Awesome. I love it. It's a beautiful tree. Yeah, so I agree. So this is what it is. It's really closely related to the emerald ash borer, but it's native. It's not as mean. All right, pine again. You've got the popcorn, but there's some reddish frass and sawdust in there, and it occurs in the bottom 12 to 14 inches of a pine. Yeah, that's it. Nice. He's hopping in here. This is the red turpentine beetle. So that's good. And we have seen mortality in Scotch pine the last few years. And so it started acting nasty. And we don't know why. So it's got to be, the climate probably is making it a little more aggressive, or the trees are a little more stressed. So, all right, another one, spruce. The buds are still alive, but it's defoliated in the top.
White pine weevil.
Oh, white pine weevil is good, but there's no death up here.
Ips.
Ips? Not ips. It does look like ips, though. All right, I'm going to give you a clue. You guys you see the little horns? Yeah. There's the indescript moth, adult. So it's the Douglas fir tussock moth. It's one of those natives that like to fool us by hitting spruce. It's like, why isn't it hit Douglas fir? So, yeah. So some insects behaving badly. And then I think this is my last one. Let's go with it. Dead spruce top. Galleries in the X or a Y shape. Somebody said it earlier? Yeah, so it's the Ips beetle. We got him. And what I like about the Ips, little dump truck butt. So that's the way to remember it in my mind anyway. So, and it's what we have mostly is Ips hunteri in the Front Range of Colorado. All right, so did that kind of loosen up your mind a little bit? So now we're going to jump to the non-native pest. Obviously, we're going to talk about emerald ash borer, but there's a lot of other things that are going on too. And these are mostly Boulder photos, and they've got a very, very strong pest program where they go out and survey sick trees and dead trees every year. So they go out and they can figure out what's going on. And the rest of us in Colorado Front Range learn from them. And so usually things show up first in Boulder suspiciously, but I think it's because they do a better job of monitoring. So Japanese beetle is becoming a problem. Is it up here yet? Yeah, it's a pain, isn't it? Yeah. Anybody deal with walnuts at all? Black walnuts? Do they grow here? Yeah. Do you have the thousand cankers disease or the bark beetles? Yeah, so because of the drought, it's pretty much wiped out black walnut, though there are some survivors in Colorado. Interestingly, in talking to Dr. McCall last night, she said that in some places where there's just an abundance of black walnut, it's really not an issue. It's present, but it's not really much of an issue. So that's good. And then we got something really strange here. Has anybody ever heard of drippy blight of red oak? Okay, it's associated with wounding caused by a Kermes scale, and then a bacteria get into the northern red oaks. In Boulder and in the Denver metro area, it's an issue where it's killing these majestic, beautiful northern red oaks. So again, it's things behaving badly. And then this is what we really want to get to. You know, when we first heard about this insect killing ash, we're going, oh no, what's going to happen? We have lots of ash. And even before we heard about this, I started with the city of Fort Collins, and maybe I shouldn't say it out loud, a long time ago. And one of the things I did right out of graduate school was form a group and invite everybody from the Front Range. We called it the Northern Colorado Pest Group. And I think it's because we were pests at first. But we started getting together, CSU, Extension, private companies, other city foresters, APHIS, Colorado Department of Ag. All of us would come together for these Northern Colorado Pest Group meetings in Fort Collins. We met about 5 times a year, just during the growing season. And at that time, I was young and not really very smart. Now I'm old and the same, but with that, we used to ask people to bring samples to the meeting. So it's like, I wonder what we moved around in Colorado. Somebody bringing a sample up from Colorado Springs or whatever. But our purpose, oh shoot, that did date me. The purpose was to really share tree pest information. It didn't matter if it was insect disease or abiotic. And sometimes we would even get into the controls and what's new, what's being tested. Does CSU have a license to test a new pesticide on a pest? So it was really a great time of sharing. And so these are just some of the players that I had mentioned earlier. Now, set this group aside just for a minute. And back in the 80s at about the same time, there was a core group of people in the Denver metro area that started the National Urban Tree Symposium. And some of you might be old enough to remember that, and they were called Nuts 1 and Nuts 2. So, and that gave rise to the Colorado Front Range, or the Colorado Urban Forestry Council. And so that morphed into the Colorado Tree Coalition when the first President Bush gave money to the states for urban forestry and to beautify the cities. And so in order to get that money, you had to have like a nonprofit group and then chapters underneath that. And so the Front Range Urban Forestry Council became a chapter of the Colorado Tree Coalition. And so there's again, it's a big list of players that would come to the table, and it didn't deal just with pest. It dealt with tree selection, varieties, resilience, even though we didn't say resilience back then. It was more resistance language. And so Trees Across Colorado has planted thousands and thousands of trees since that time. And the Champion Tree program came out of that, and all sorts of good things. But part of that was an insect and disease committee. So I headed up the Northern Colorado Pest Group, and then eventually I headed up the Insect and Disease Committee on this group. And we were a pretty active group, and we started putting on workshops. So, and that was one of the good parts of that. So as part of that, when we started hearing about ash, this is how the big story ties together. We decided we needed a cool name again. You know, you can't really get better than nuts in some ways. But so we did EPIC, and that's the Emerging Pests in Colorado Committee, and it superseded all the other insect and disease groups at the time. And we started really focusing in on this issue of the potential of emerald ash borer getting. We knew it was just a matter of time. And coincidentally, right when we formed the EPIC group, the Thousand Cankers disease of walnut really took off. And so it gave us a test case on how to prepare and be ready for something bigger of the magnitude of emerald ash borer. So those relationships that were built during that time, it wasn't just one city, it wasn't just one company, it wasn't just one agency. It was a bunch of willing people who were saying, okay, I'm gonna set my some of my work aside and set aside some time to build these relationships, to build these bridges, so when we do get an epidemic type pest, we're going to be ready to share information to start managing it. And Kathleen is going to talk a little bit about the Boulder story as we go. So there's a little bit more about EPIC. So we did do the thousand cankers disease. We are looking at some of other pests as well coming in. We keep wondering if spotter and lanternfly is going to get to Fort Collins and what it will do, you know, especially to the hops, I think, which it's a microbrew mecca, Fort Collins is, but there's a lot of those places now. So we really help define roles of agencies by having so many people come to the table together. Education and outreach, this is where we started doing those workshops all the time, very similar to this. And we did it every year for a while, and then it got to be too much, and so we switched to an every other year. So next year will be another big one in Colorado somewhere. And that's how we first got to meet Dr. McCullough and really expanded our network to figure out how to start managing emerald ash borer once it got here. Yeah, and so we did some publications, and eventually we even got a logo. So that was low on our list, though. When emerald ash borer was first detected in Colorado, it was in Boulder. My boss, who's the city forester of Fort Collins, worked for Kathleen at the time, and she's actually the one who found emerald ash borer first. And what ended up happening is through APHIS and the Colorado Department of Ag, they instituted an incident command type structure system. And so we had a response team in place already just from the players from EPIC, and then we had to add a few people. And then this is, again, just a list of who collaborated with all of it. So you can kind of take a picture. This isn't even all the logos up here, but when it was found, there was an immediate response from all the communities around Boulder. We sent equipment down to help try to delineate where the infestation was. And so we just helped them look and learn. And that's kind of how we did it. So I'm going fast because Kathleen needs more time. So just to kind of show you the impact, this right here are the number of trees in the cities, and this is all considered the Denver metro area. Fort Collins isn't part of that. But when you look at like Boulder, for example, you can see, you know, close to 80,000 trees, and I think 14% were ash, right? 14% were ash, and so that's what's represented by the tip here. Then you look in Denver, and you can see they have over 300,000 ash in their in Denver city limits. So it's a huge issue, and when you add it all up, there's almost 1.5 million trees that are ash that have the potential to be impacted in that area. I don't know what your population would be here, but it still has to be pretty high on the list of things. Again, this is Denver kind of showing a concentrated area where all the private ash trees were marked. And so then you can see the green spots are the city trees, the yellow spots are the private trees. So it's a crazy number. I mean, over 300,000 on private property, almost 30,000 on the right-of-way. Yes?
How did you map or how did they map the private trees?
So when they were out doing an inventory, they asked whoever was doing the inventory to mark down the addresses or the sites where they saw trees in the yards or backyards. And so we don't know the diameter or anything of those, but we do know that those properties had ash from the surveys. So, all right, I'm almost done here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what happened in Fort Collins. We did an iTree Eco study. Has anybody conducted one of those here? Worked on them? Maybe a few. Have you heard about it a little bit? They come in and they do plots. You can have somebody come in and do them, and they measure all the ground cover and everything and species composition, and then they give you a good statistically sound estimate of what your tree population is and all the benefits that they do. So I just wanted to point this out. So you've heard this over and over. Green ash especially were planted to replace American elm because of Dutch elm disease. But we didn't learn from Dutch elm disease, so we planted even more ash than we did elm. And but during all that time, ash was even planted before Dutch elm disease came here. During all that time, you got these trees that are getting big, and they're really adding a lot to our overall forest. So nothing else really is all that important here, except to say that ash make up 15% of Fort Collins' total tree population, but it accounts for 33% of the canopy cover. That's huge. So that's stormwater interception, the carbon storage here. You can see those numbers are really high. The shade is, truly huge. And so the impacts, again, in Billings, what's the percent of ash trees? 40. So, and then I think some communities might be higher, probably a lot will be lower, but.
Hoover's got 70%.
Wow. Do you know a number that equates to that? Is that like 4,000 trees or 5,000?
Don't know the number.
Okay. Yeah, so you can tell it's going to definitely have an impact. So there's definitely an opportunity for companies to make money, but I think, doing it in an ethical way is great, and sharing what you learn with your customers to educate them so they make more educated decisions on, and I think all of us want to increase the credibility of our profession. So, and really, arborist has moved kind of from, in my opinion, from the dark ages to a truly professional line that would be the equivalent of like a journeyman type program and moving into the professional type programs.